Before I introduce our creative keynote speaker, we have one of the CMC Changemakers to get us started, and we're very grateful to BAFTA for sponsoring the Changemakers this year. BAFTA are delighted to support CMC's Changemakers. This reflects BAFTA's international programme of events and initiatives that support and develop new talent, offering access to some of the industry's most inspiring people. Aaron Simmons is a former BBC New Comedy Award and Amused Moose Comedy Award finalist. His many broadcast credits include ITV2's The Stand Up Sketch Show, BBC Radio 1 and 1 Extra's Unexpected Fluids podcasts. Aaron has performed at festivals and comedy clubs around the country, including Leicester Comedy Festival, the Comedy Store, and last summer, having performed a work in progress there in 2018, his critically acclaimed debut show Disabled Coconut was nominated for Best Comedy Show in the Broadway World UK 2019 Edinburgh Fringe Awards. Aaron has cerebral palsy and is a professionally trained personal trainer, a former international basketball player, and world champion powerlifter. He's an ambassador for Cerebra. Aaron.
Thank you. I would like to point out that that is taken directly off my agent's website and not what I asked you to read out. That's not how I wanted to start this presentation. That's not sort of the level of ego that I have. But thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here. I am a stand-up comedian. I've been a comedian for about 6 years. I've also got the straightest afro in the world. I don't know how this has happened, but this is lockdown, and I still haven't gone to a hairdresser yet. So apologies for that. I wanted to talk today about creativity and how one aspect of my creativity really, one thing I found out about creativity really helped me become a better stand-up comedian. That thing is asking yourself a very simple question. How do you feel about a blank piece of paper? People react differently to that question. I've never met anybody who loves the idea of a blank piece of paper like very firmly, but some people like a blank piece of paper. It frees them up. They feel like they can talk about absolutely anything and therefore don't feel any restrictions and therefore can flow very comfortably and very easily. I do not. I find the idea of a blank piece of paper almost too much stimulus. I am paralyzed by choice. There is anything that I could talk about and it doesn't help me to have a blank canvas to work from. I do not feel that my success as a comedian has come from me being a good writer. It comes from me being a good editor. And the best piece of advice that I got given for me personally was this. A bad piece of paper is better than a blank piece of paper. If you have something on it, it's easier to edit than it is to create. That is what I have found during my time. And obviously lockdown has sort of changed how we're going to be creating stuff, and it was very limiting at the beginning because as I know personally that I struggled a lot in terms of my mental health, in terms of how to deal with the lack of work that I had. I went from quitting my job, my day job as a personal trainer in July last year to being gigging 5, 6, 7 nights a week to none because of this pandemic. And obviously there were much more important things in the world. I get that. But I struggled with the lack of creativity and the understanding of what I could do when there were no live gigs. There was no Edinburgh for me to write towards. And so what I did was I started to think about what I could do within lockdown and what I could do from my flat with limited tech and how it could be something creative and something that I wanted to put out and for people to enjoy. And so the idea that I came up with was called The Comedy Workout. And what it was going to be a podcast where I was going to interview a comedian friend that I knew, and I was going to interview them whilst giving them a workout, therefore using the fact that I was a personal trainer and as a comedian, putting them two together. Now, some of you may hear that and think, oh, that sounds like a fun idea. And some of you think, well, that sounds like the worst idea in the world. I don't want to go to the gym myself, let alone hear a comedian that I've never heard of interview another comedian that I've never heard of whilst they're panting and sweating and doing press-ups. And you're right, it wasn't a great idea. But what that idea allowed me to do was understand what I needed to do in order to create a podcast from my own flat. So I understood the logistics of doing it over a Zoom, or how you can make it work, and whether or not I needed to do it with X, Y, and Z or anything like that. What came out of that comedy workout podcast idea was my new podcast. And it's something that I am really proud of, and it's something that I've worked really hard on. It's called the Silliest, Superest, Heroest podcast. And it's me chatting with a couple of comedians trying to come up with the ultimate superhero, combining different attributes from different heroes and pitting them against each other and deciding which one you would rather have. Now, to some of you, that sounds like an even worse idea than the comedy workout. I get that. But for me, it is a huge part of my creativity, and has really sort of invigorated me in terms of lockdown and giving me a purpose and giving me that creative spark. And there's a couple of reasons why I mention it. Firstly, I do think that creativity of just creating something for your own sense of, is this going to make me feel happier, is a huge benefit to anyone. And I wanted to sort of help explain the process of how I got to this podcast that I'm very proud of. Because it's not just you see this finished result. That's what happens in stand-up. You see the final joke and it works. It's a funny joke, but you don't see the work that's gone into getting that to be funny, trying it when it's the wrong wording or explained incorrectly. And I think that if you can rewind and you go, okay, this is the creative process, you have a bad idea, you change it a little bit, you turn it into a good idea, that can be really important for people to see. And I wanted to explain that to you guys so that you don't think, oh, I can't possibly do what these guys do because I'm not that funny, or I'm not that good an actor or that good a singer or anything like that. Because I know that I personally didn't start stand-up until I was 24, even though I wanted to do it since I was about 16. And that's just because I went on the TV, I saw Michael McIntyre do Live at the Apollo, and he was hilarious, and I was funny, but I wasn't that funny. But the thing about it is that you only get that funny by being how funny you are at the beginning, and then getting slightly better and slightly better and slightly better. And that was the first reason why I mentioned my podcast. And the second is that I want you to download my podcast and listen to my podcast. The Silliest, Superest, Heroest podcast with me, Aaron Simmons. It's not even out yet. It'll be out in a couple of weeks. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about is about disability in general and how important stand-up is to me. And I would just explain very, very quickly because I know I'm running out of time. For me, stand-up has given me the opportunity to explain how I want to be defined by my disability. All my life, it was explained for me. My parents, my teachers, my friends, whatever, they would say, oh, this is Aaron, this is what he can and can't do. I wanted to ignore that. I didn't want to ignore that, but I wanted to be in charge of how people saw me. And the reason why that's so important to me is because I feel like the most interactions that I have that upset me around my disability are out of an uncomfortable awkwardness of not wanting to talk about it and then having to guess what I can and can't do, or sort of assuming that I can do something or assuming that I can't do something. And what I have used my stand-up for is to open that conversation so that people can talk about disability. And I think that the more we have disability representation on TV and other media, the more that conversation is going to be open and less awkward, and therefore more people are going to find out what each disabled person individually is capable of doing, and therefore it will be less awkward and embarrassing and painful and blech for everybody. Cool. I think that's my time. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Aaron. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Aaron, thank you very, very much indeed. I love the idea of silly as superheroes. Absolutely brilliant.
Wait,
Uh,
then listen ahead.
make sure you all log on to that podcast when it's available. Thank you very much, Aaron.